Good morning, distinguished guests. We are thrilled to have you with us virtually today at the NC Chamber's Government Affairs Summit. It is my pleasure to introduce our MC for today's event, Kate Payne, Vice President of Communications with the Chamber, to provide our welcome remarks. Kate leads a communications team that is responsible for amplifying the voices of North Carolina businesses. In addition to elevating the profiles of individual businesses and their leaders, Kate works to keep NC Chamber members connected to issues and events that impact their business. She also works to make the public and elected officials aware of the business community's priorities. Kate, take it away.
Thank you, Janelle, and good morning to all. On behalf of the NC Chamber, thank you for joining us today. It's great to have so many of you here, especially on a busy Monday morning. We are proud to be hosting this annual event and appreciate you taking active part in today's dialogue. I would first like to take a moment to acknowledge our sponsors. Our gold sponsor today is Dominion Energy. Our silver sponsors are AT&T, Farm Bureau, and Smith Anderson. Our bronze sponsors are AAA, ATMC, Duke Energy, Lyft, Nelson Mullins, and the NC Rural Center. And our patron sponsor, North Carolina's Electric Cooperatives. All of these sponsors can be found throughout today's presentation. I hope you'll take note of them in the sponsor section of the event platform, as this summit would not be possible without their support. Let's begin with a few housekeeping items. Today's program can be found in the lobby under the Agenda tab or at the bottom of this main stage, where we'll spend most of our time today. We'll conclude our summit with group discussions in the lounge area, so please have your mics, have your cameras ready. We also encourage you to update your personal profile information in the People section, if you haven't had a chance to do that, so you can start connecting with fellow attendees one-on-one and maximize your networking experience. The NC Chamber's mission is to research, develop, advocate, and communicate for policies and solutions that produce a nationally competitive business climate in North Carolina. We truly believe every business is important and that an aligned business community matters to our state's future. That is why we work tirelessly to advocate for solutions to make North Carolina a place where each business and its workforce can thrive. We have a shared responsibility to reach this goal now more so than ever, as we continue to ramp up vaccinations, reconcile the health challenges of the COVID-19 pandemic, and navigate new ways of living and working. Our ability to harness opportunities depends in large part on our ability to work together as a unified community. I want to acknowledge the hard work of our local chambers of commerce and thank their representatives in our audience today for your contributions in working together to keep our local community safe, strong, and growing. I also want to thank our elected leaders who took time out of their busy schedule to be with us today for working tirelessly to ensure North Carolina continues to be a great place to live, work, raise families, especially as our population rises. This event is typically one of our most lively due to the many conversations and connections being made. The audience is usually buzzing, even through some of the speakers. And while we do enjoy being able to turn on that mute button today so we can hear the valued content from each presenter in this virtual format, we recognize that it's the collaboration and the connection with each and every one of you here today that helps the NC Chamber team accomplish its mission. Thank you. Thank you for your engagement and creativity in the last year as we find ways to connect and collaborate for our great state. With that, let's get started with today's program. I'd like to introduce my colleague, Ray Starling, to share a brief update with us. As the General Counsel of the NC Chamber and President of the NC Chamber Legal Institute, Ray sets strategy for litigation of the NC Chamber, the NC Chamber Legal Institute, and its affiliated entities. He also serves as the lead for public policy development functions of the Chamber, assessing and advising on current and emerging laws, rulings, and regulations affecting business in North Carolina. Ray manages our public policy staff and works with NC Chamber leadership to devise and implement the appropriate strategies to advance the interests of North Carolina business in the North Carolina General Assembly and regulatory bodies. Please welcome Ray to our virtual stage.
Thank you, Kate. You can hold your applause because we can't hear it anyway. So I'm going to tell myself that there was some there, even though I'm fairly certain there wasn't. Look, this is a little bit intimidating. I just looked at our list of attendees, and when I think about the government affairs community in the state of North Carolina, and I look at the names on that list of folks who are listening in, I sort of say to myself, who am I to talk to this group about the Chamber's agenda? But that's exactly what I hope to do over the next few minutes. So thank you for being with us again. I'm going to share my screen. I hope you're able to see the slides. And if not, maybe somebody will chat me and let me know. But my job here is to provide a little bit of a legislative and policy update. Again, we'll move through this very quickly. In fact, I would say that the next thing we do here is do a little preview. Be patient with me a moment, please. There we go. A little preview of the next 15 minutes of your life, give you a big picture of what the Chamber is working on this legislative session, talk about our priority items, mention some nominations and confirmations that the governor has submitted that we think are extraordinarily high quality and that hope to be confirmed quickly, and then talk a little bit about the money situation, which, as you know, is a little bit different this year than what we are used to. I certainly hope that we get through this like a fat man moving through a barbed wire fence. We're going to hit on all the main points, but get through as quickly as possible. That's my favorite introductory joke, by the way. And so it's my hope that this flies by. In fact, I would hope that this actually zooms by. Okay, folks, it's a cloudy Monday morning. That's about as good as it's going to get. I will say this Zoom world that we're in is different, and hopefully we're on the wind down of that. We do hate we're not with you in person, and that leads to some funny situations from time to time. In fact, the other day, I was on a call with someone that I've known for years, and they said, Ray, tell us a little something about your background. And I was offended because I thought this person was sort of familiar with my career and what I had done previously in life. And then I realized they were actually asking me a question about my Zoom background. So we're going to give you a chance this morning to hear a little bit about the Chamber's background, if you will. And I'll keep in mind that the only thing more useless than zero expense reports are PowerPoints that go too long. So I'll try to be disciplined and move right ahead. Look, Kate mentioned our mission at the Chamber. I'm going to touch on here in this slide our vision: establish and maintaining a state that is a national leader in private sector job growth, which means that we also would be a top state in which to work and live. We do that by focusing on three pillars that came out of our Vision 2030 study. One of those is to support our education and talent supply pipeline. Another is to police the business climate and the business environment to make sure that we are competitive compared to our peers. And then not last but not least, to make sure that the infrastructure is there, both on the personal side and in the traditional sense of infrastructure, to make sure that we have what we need to move forward in the 21st century. So through that process, and when I say that process in terms of looking at our vision, thinking about our key focus areas, we ask our committees. There are 5 different policy committees throughout the Chamber, all staffed, chaired, and populated by North Carolina Chamber members. Their idea is to advise us as staff and leaders at the Chamber on what it would be that our legislative agenda should include every year. And so through that process, I'll just say to you, what ended up on that punch list? Well, we're going to walk through it. At the top of that list is Destination 2030. It's my hope that you've heard about this by now. This is the name that we've given to the effort to modernize the way we fund transportation in the state. We do have a coalition that's working on this effort. It's very broad across the business community. And if you're not already a part of that coalition, we certainly invite you to send us a message in the chat box and we'll get you pulled into that, signed up. The bottom line here, folks, on the transportation conversation, and I think what's great about this is there seems to be very bipartisan agreement that the sentence I'm about to say is true. There's not really a partisan stance, if you will, on transportation funding, or at least understanding what the challenge is. And that challenge is this: that we are funding a 21st century transportation network with a 20th century transportation funding mechanism. The best part here to us, with the help of Mark Coggins on our government affairs team, our understanding is we feel like our elected officials have, quote, gotten it. They are speaking our language And really, again, there's no debate that this is a conversation that's got to be had. Of course, there could be debate about how quickly it needs to be had or what the actual solutions are. But I really tip my hat to Mark Coggins and, in fact, a former chamber employer, Jake Cashin, been very helpful in socializing this notion among our elected officials and making sure that we're thinking about transitioning away from the modal fuels tax and pursuing some other modernized form of funding solution. Our legislative team, who I'll introduce you to here in just a moment, and our coalition partners, we feel like we're getting traction in both chambers. There are study and commission ideas that are now becoming legislative text. We think that is a very encouraging development. And again, I would just highlight that this is a bipartisan effort here, one that we think key leaders in both parties understand. And perhaps we'll hear more about that in just a few minutes. One last thing I'll say about Destination 2030. We see it as a process. We understand that there's no switch that can be flipped and all of a sudden our transportation network is fully funded at the level that it needs to be and completely modernized. But it does take, notwithstanding that folks understand this challenge, it still takes something. My dad, a word he used years ago was gumption. It still takes some gumption to tackle it. And I actually Googled that term because I wanted to make sure it wasn't one that one of my parents had made up. It is a real word, and it means a spirited initiative and a sense of resourcefulness. And so we've got to continue to push for these bold solutions, these ones that require gumption to capture our current transportation economy. Everything is on the table in this regard. So we're stay engaged in that. And then obviously healthcare continues to be a real concern for our members, making sure that they've got access to what we call value-driven healthcare that both provides good outcomes and at reasonable cost points. I think it's fair to say that over the course of the last year, no issue has really garnered the General Assembly's attention quite like healthcare during the course of the pandemic. We sense now that those conversations about the healthcare system responding and adequately providing for COVID, which of course in North Carolina, we've been so blessed by the healthcare system that we have here. That conversation though now is turning back to the same topics that vexed us a little bit before COVID. That as we look post a COVID atmosphere, how are we going to continue to try to control cost in the system and make sure that we ensure access for most folks? We've seen association health plan language pass the General Assembly last year, only to be held up in federal litigation, and now a change in administration. And so not surprisingly, given that there's no cohesive path on association health plans, or at least not one that we've been able to carefully navigate, employers are now having us look at things like exclusive provider organizations, which aim to reduce the cost of healthcare that employers provide to their employees. Issues of healthcare access like telehealth and its prevalence in a post-pandemic system are also top of mind. So the question remains, will our legislative leaders, and I hope some of them are listening, will they be able to meet in the middle and drive some solutions that have a real impact here on cost, access, and value? Well, we at the Chamber, we think so. We certainly hope so, but we also think so. Our conversations lead us to believe that this is indeed happening. These are conversations that are going on and will continue to go on, and we want to be at the table for that. And as those of you that are lobbyists out there know, you know that old joke, if you're not at the table, you're on it. So certainly the NC Chamber wants to be at the table and feels like it is for these healthcare conversations. I would mention our education and workplace development goals. School reopening obviously dominated the conversation down at the General Assembly for the first 6 or 8 weeks of the session. It seems we are now past that with a very nice bipartisan solution that was almost unanimous. We've now seen bills and legislation come into being that expands summer school access. There's a lot of school calendar flexibility bills that are being heard in committee, most of those local bills, if you will. But now I think we're getting serious about where are we going to go after COVID. And so some of our goals are here. We want to make sure we're continuing to move toward our attainment goals. We want to make sure there's adequate pre-K slots. We want to make sure we're focusing on reading at the 3rd grade level. And then you're going to hear me talk a little bit more today about this talent pipeline issue and the alignment. How do we make sure that the students coming out of the end of our educational pipeline are prepared to go directly into that workforce. How do we line up that demand side with the supply side and make sure those two things weave together and interlock? Obviously, this requires working with our legislators, but we're almost 3/4 finished with a series that focuses on our post-secondary education leaders, in addition to Ms. Truitt. And I would just mention that in addition to working closely with the General Assembly, the legislators, if you will, we're working closely with Superintendent Truitt, with Community College President Thomas Smith, and then of course with University President Peter Hans. And I would even add to that group our independent post-secondary institutions, the education and training entities that are sometimes referred to as private schools, who are also helping us supply ready workers for this workforce that our companies here at the Chamber so desperately need. I mentioned environmental, agriculture, and broadband. Certainly our friends at Farm Bureau, who are a silver sponsor of today's event, care about the Farm Act. But the truth of the matter is there's a lot of stuff in the Farm Act that impacts all of us, not just those who spend their lives and earn their livings out in the field. So we'll watch that closely. We know that there's broadband legislation, the AT&T, yet another of our silver sponsors I'll mention. They care about this. Our members care about this initiative. And we all know that it's one of the most frequent things mentioned by legislators down at the building, one of the things that they hear from their constituencies. And we think that's been even accelerated during the course of COVID. And then last but not least, we want to keep our eye on environmental justice, legislative conversations, and DEQ permitting predictability. This is very important if you want to do a project or expand in the state and potentially create room for new jobs. You've got to know what the system is that you are navigating. And so we hope that there's a process and a sincere conversation about how to put us on a path so that the business community can adequately navigate all that's required to comply with environmental justice requirements and any other DEQ permitting. On that same line, related to regulatory atmosphere, I'll mention that we're keeping our eye on several issues in the workforce or the workplace rather issues and business climate category. Note on the record, or I will note on the record, that we're openly opposed to a proposal that's been filed over in the state Senate regarding shifting our state's liability system from a contrib system to a comparative negligence system. Regarding that, and really all of the items on this list, it's worth noting that from the Chamber's perspective, there's never a good time to saddle employers with more liability shifting, but it seems like when we are just emerging from a historic pandemic, it's probably a less good time than others. So I mentioned that contrib negligence proposal, which we oppose. This year, we have not seen the rebuttable presumption language with regard to workers' compensation liability for COVID-19. We're grateful for that. We do know that there continues to be discussions about reform or changes to the unemployment insurance system. We would love to see some time settle out before those conversations start in earnest, and we would certainly love to get past the time that the federal government has provided so much supplemental income through the UI system at the federal level. Before we have a conversation about revisiting what our structure here in the state needs to be. The last thing I would mention here in this workplace environment and the business climate is there are proposals at both the state and the federal level that relate to Department of Labor regulations. There was a rulemaking proposal at the state level that's now found its way into the courts. I would note for the record that it's actually opposed by the State Department of Labor. It's certainly also opposed by the Chamber and the business community. And then we're also keeping our eye out for those new recommendations that are continually coming down at the federal level that make it a little difficult to navigate. I think everybody in this space obviously means well, but if a business feels like they've figured out the best way to provide for safety and comfort of their employees, we hope that that's not second guessed by bureaucrats kind of behind the veil, if you will, in government. The next thing I'll mention is taxes. Taxes is always on the table. Senators Newton, Daniel, and Rabin in the Senate have introduced a bill that would tie the franchise tax, something the Chamber has worked on repeatedly, session in and session out for now about 10 years. They are proposing that we simplify the way that tax is actually calculated, eliminating the two property-related bases that effectively penalize tangible investment in the state. I would also point out that in this Senate-driven tax cut proposal, about 90% of the benefits of that package actually inure to individual income taxpayers, either families or individuals who are salaried, or those individuals that are in a pass-through entity like an LLC, and that's the way they earn their income. And as you know, one of those proposals is to lower the personal income tax from 5.25 down to 4.99, continuing to make us one of the most competitive in the Southeast. That proposal also leaves the corporate tax rate at its current 2.5, which we think is okay. As you know, lowering that personal income tax rate helps ease the burden on individuals. And again, on that corporate tax rate, we feel like we're in a very competitive place here in North Carolina, and we're grateful for that. I have to maintain some credibility, mention that there's a hot topic discussion downtown over the PPP deductibility, aligning North Carolina's deductibility with that created at the federal level. We are certainly watching that issue. And then we're also going to engage here shortly on a solar tax credit issue that has vexed some of our members and that frankly puts the business climate at risk, the tax climate, because it creates some questions about whether programs that the General Assembly enacts can be relied upon by the business community in the long run. Of all of these discussions, we most appreciate the approach to business-related taxes and the focus on reduction and simplification of the franchise tax. We know that there are also conversations in the House about that same proposal. And as with most budget cycles, we would anticipate that the finance side and the spending side would all sort of line up at some point together. Now, Chris Smith's probably listening in this morning over at Smith Anderson, also one of our silver sponsors. And Chris, give me a hard time if I didn't mention that the Chamber was supporting the governor's nominations to the Business Court. And supporting would frankly be an understatement. We are very excited about these highly qualified individuals who've been nominated to such an important state and to such an important court in our state's business environment, the North Carolina Business Court. We look forward to the bill that was introduced last week, which actually moves the governor's nominations forward. We hope that that's heard in the House as soon as this week, and we plan to be there with our support both in the House and in the Senate. Just a phenomenal slate of individuals, and we look forward to putting them to work. I would also mention that we're excited about another of the governor's nominees, this one to the North Carolina Industrial Commission, Ms. Adrienne Phillips, who has been a longtime hearing officer. We look forward to supporting her nomination when it begins to move. And again, just can't overstate how important the jurists are who hear our disputes over what the law actually says. The next one's fun to talk about, and this is a little unusual. I'm very grateful that we're in a state that's not having to explore raising taxes to rise from the pandemic. We know here at the Chamber that that has taken sacrifices and a steady hand through the years. We're grateful for that. We typically do not weigh in at the Chamber on the budget insofar as pure budgetary issues are concerned. But we certainly do realize that priorities set in the budget are important to all of the business community. And so I would just add here one caveat for year 2021, and it relates more to the federal money allocated to the state as opposed to the annual fiscal budget. And that is that it is probably time, particularly with those federal dollars coming into the state, to think strongly and clearly about investments in the talent pipeline and about how to address our critical infrastructure needs. So more on that later. This, of course, has now gone out of the news cycle, but you'll remember when the Evergreen was stuck down in the Suez Canal. I would like to say that here at the Chamber, our team of government affairs professionals tries to be that WD-40 to sometimes get things unstuck, but sometimes they might be the ones that try to get something stuck. And so mentioning them and just saying that sticking and unsticking is exactly what this team does and does well. I have to tip my hat to Mark Coggins, Deborah Durr, and Peter Daniel Jr. If there are legislative members on the Zoom and you're watching in, I hope by now that you've gotten to meet all three of these folks. And if not, please reach out and let us know. We'd love to swing by and talk with you about our legislative priorities. In fact, our gold sponsor, Dominion, one of their phrases is that they keep the lights on, which they most certainly do for their customers, but so does this team. And I have to brag on them a little bit. I can assure you, being on their text and on their email stream, they do not sleep. In fact, I'm often laying down in the bed and I'm almost nodded off, and I hear that phone buzz over there, and it's one of them updating us on the fact that a bill got referred to a different committee, or someone needs to swing by and visit with somebody else tomorrow. So we appreciate their hard work. I think they represent us well here at the chamber. And if you ever feel differently, I hope you'll let us know. I would also just mention in passing, and this is my second to last slide, so we've almost made it. But obviously, we talk about all these legislative initiatives because this is our government affairs conference. But would also mention that we're trying to still navigate our way out of COVID as a business community. And what we're seeing both on the business side and certainly on the voter side or on the constituent side is that more and more people are viewing COVID as less of a healthcare risk and more of an economic one. We're optimistic. We actually think we'll rise from both of those threats, but I think that's worth mentioning this morning that that's on the business community's mind. We're also trying to figure out how will business be different in the coming years because of COVID. One of the speakers at our seminars months ago, or probably over a year ago now, said that events like COVID have a tendency to accelerate things that were going well in society and in the business world into going even better. And they have a tendency to accelerate the deceleration of things that were already decelerating before COVID hit or before a shock to the system like COVID would hit. And we certainly see that. We see the retail world changing. We see the work environment changing. We see the delivery of healthcare changing. We see how people order food is changing. And so that's all stuff that our members have to react to in the middle of a very, very closely split political atmosphere, particularly at the federal level, and certainly in a place where folks are keeping their eye on the courts and on the legal climate. So I thought I would just mention that those things are also on our minds, even though they don't translate directly into legislative proposals. But the last thing I would say is this, and I see people like Speaker Blue, Senator Blue on the camera, and I just want to say thank you to our elected officials. I don't think we say enough and acknowledge enough the sacrifice that they put in for the puny amount of money that they are paid by the state to serve so many hours down in the General Assembly. You are not average pickles. You all are a big deal. Everybody else looks like sweet petites up next to the folks that actually represent us down in the General Assembly from both sides of the aisle. And I would also say that to the larger business community who's listening in this morning. We enjoy working with you. We enjoy working with our elected officials, and we hope to keep doing that so that we, again, make North Carolina a perennial #1 place in which to live, work, and do business. So with that, Kate, we enjoyed presenting some of our thoughts. If folks have questions, we absolutely look forward to discussing maybe in the chat room or reach out to us, and we'll be glad to email or hop on the phone if we need to talk.
Thanks, Ray. And we're actually over to Mark.
Oh, sorry about that. Bring it on, Mark. Good to see you.
Thanks, Ray and Kate. Good morning. I'm thrilled to be here and honored to welcome our speakers for today. First, we'll hear from Senator Daniel T. Blue Jr. He's the current Democratic leader of the North Carolina Senate, currently representing District 14 in Wake County. Senator Blue is a lifelong North Carolinian and learned the value of hard work growing up in his parents' 4-room farmhouse in Robeson County. For more than 3 decades, he has brought that hard work ethic to the General Assembly, serving in both the House and the Senate, including time spent as Speaker of the House. Senator Blue has also served as chairman of a Judiciary and Appropriations Committee and as chairman of the Legislative Black Caucus. Senator Blue earned a mathematics degree from North Carolina Central University and a law degree from Duke University. Outside of his distinguished public service, he's managing partner of Blue, Stevens, and Fellers, a Raleigh-based law firm. Please join me in welcoming Senator Blue to the stage.
Thank you so much, Mark, and good morning to all of you. I want to first really salute Ray on that excellent presentation that he just did. I think that there can be no doubt as to the issues facing the state that makes us move forward in a business climate. And I thought that it was very synopsized, but straight to the point. And I just think it should be distributed widely to every member of the General Assembly. I want to thank you also for the opportunity to join with you this morning and let you know that speaking to the Government Affairs Summit is always a pleasure that I look forward to. And today is no exception. I enjoy sharing thoughts with you. I want to frame my comments this morning from the backdrop of what we've been wrestling with for the last year. So framing it against where we were 1 year ago. We were in the throes of the COVID-19 pandemic. As a nation, we seem not to have a handle on what was really happening with this virus. We didn't really know how to contain it. We were still experimenting. No vaccinations anywhere in sight, and certainly no plan for distributing vaccines once they were developed. We did not have, the discussion was constantly on lack of sufficient PPE and the other things that we all felt were necessary to effectively combat this virus. One could argue that as in past national crises, we didn't even seem to have a strategy for how we collectively will deal with it on the national level, many state level strategies going on. And so I would remind you as we begin that leadership in state capitals, as well as Washington, is extremely important. And I want to commend Governor Cooper and his team for their leadership and the transparency in tracking this virus here in North Carolina, and especially Dr. Mandy Cohen. I think that they've done a superb job. We may not have liked everything they've done, but by and large, the Cooper administration has tirelessly and effectively, I think, moved to counteract this pandemic. Suffice it to say that I have some concerns as to what may have been happening at the national level as we tackled it. But I want to say that the North Carolina Chamber has displayed excellent leadership over the past 12 to 15 months as this virus took its toll on our businesses, especially the small business sector in the state, the restaurants, the hotels, and minority businesses. You made your voices known in so many ways and subsequently provided a blueprint for aligning the efforts of public and private leaders through relaunching North Carolina. I'm glad to have been part of some of the conversations connected with that. But in this effort, you identified the principles the business community believes should guide North Carolina leaders in finding an initial path to statewide recovery. In the longer term, relaunching North Carolina outlined the steps needed to create a more resilient disaster recovery and preparedness strategy for future crises. Now, the COVID-19 crisis launches me to what I really want to talk about in the remaining few minutes that I have. And that is, I want to quickly address 3 topics with you. The first, the COVID-19 pandemic and its impact on North Carolina. When COVID burst on the scene in February 2020, we had no idea that it would take over our state the way it did, take the toll on our states, on its businesses, or on the nation. We knew that it had the potential to create significant job losses. We knew that COVID-19 cases were in the offing, and we knew that there would be hospitalizations and the possibility of people dying. But nationally, not nearly 600,000, and the many thousands in North Carolina. But we were not initially prepared for the magnitude of what COVID-19 would do to this state. Some industries have been harder hit as others, I indicated earlier. I think about, again, the small businesses, the minority-owned businesses, the restaurant and hotel businesses in the state who were already struggling to some degree, but were especially devastated when this pandemic hit. And as you notice, we've focused a lot of attention on trying to address some of those needs, even with the COVID funding that we've received. From a state perspective, though, we have been very fortunate. Initially, we anticipated significant revenue decline. However, our state general fund revenues are in relatively good shape. And thanks to federal stimulus funding, we have quite a bit of one-time money that can be used for a variety of purposes. As we noticed what's happened in our state, big box retailers have done extremely well. Small businesses, mom and pop, Main Street businesses have taken a lick, and we need to address those issues. So in short, the point that I want to make is that we have sufficient funds to do the things we need to do to rebound from this pandemic, to continue investing in our state, in our children, and our economy. The question is whether we will make those strategic and transforming investments while we have the funds to do so. And looking at the priorities of the chamber, I think that it's obvious that you agree with a lot of the things that we ought to be doing. And this is a rare opportunity where we have the ability to infuse cash to make those kinds of investments. I would report too that the fact that our unemployment rate is at the lowest level since last March when the pandemic began. We're down to 5.2 in the latest numbers, as opposed to 3.9 when it started and 7.2 at the height of the pandemic. Second point I want to address briefly is the legislature's role in setting policy and developing its own budget to deal with these issues. It's an essential function of the legislature to pass budgets. However, development and enactment of a state budget requires cooperation and collaboration between and among multiple entities. It requires cooperation and collaboration with the governor, the speaker, and the president pro tem of the Senate, the Democratic membership in the Senate, and many other stakeholders. We all get an opportunity to get a vote on the ultimate package, and we look forward to working with our Republican colleagues and Governor Cooper to get a budget that can be enacted and signed into law this session. I've carefully reviewed the budget that Governor Cooper sent forth, his recommendations, and there are many parts of it that I and my caucus like very much. We believe there are many parts of these recommendations that move our state in a direction that takes care of our educational needs, provides a sound basic education for all, invests in early learning and development, provides Leandro investments, retains and develops talented educators, and educates the workforce for tomorrow. Senate Bill 387, the Excellent Public Schools Act of 2021, the Science of Reading, is a great step forward. The chamber's support of this bill was welcomed, and your voice and other parts of the budget currently being developed in the legislature will be instrumental in ensuring that we are making transforming investments designed to move our state forward. And I commend Senator Berger on the Excellent Public Schools Act of 2021. There are other things that we need to look at. Governor Cooper's recommendations take steps to reinvigorate economic opportunity and resilience by investing in North Carolina's future through the issuance of general obligation bonds. I think that's worthy of discussion. And talks about strengthening North Carolina's business and industry, supporting our communities, expanding Medicaid, regardless of what you call it, by using the American Rescue Plan's significant financial incentives. And it aligns the shared goals with the shared goals of Senator Berger, Speaker Moore, and my future NC to increase by 2 million adults the number of North Carolinians with post-secondary degrees or certificates. We have an opportunity to leapfrog the competition. I reflect back when my father graduated from high school, it went to the 11th grade. By the time my mother graduated, just a few years later, it went to the 12th grade. When I started school in North Carolina, there was no kindergarten. When my kids started, a generation later, there was kindergarten for all the kids. Now we can look at community college, and we realize that community college education of post-high school education is essential. Could you imagine what impact investing in community colleges to a great degree, as we do public education generally, would have on the future job growth in the state. Imagine taking a number out of the funds that are available to make tuition in community colleges free for 3 years, and how that would lead us to achieving the 200,000 additional North Carolinians with post high school education. Again, I think that relaunching North Carolina seems like a program. The Chamber's relaunching North Carolina seems like a program and the kinds of investments that the Chamber would strongly support. And I urge you to make your voices known on the budget in this regard. And lastly, I want to say that one point that's been on my mind for a while, and I just want to leave the thought of it with you. The November 20th election was a wake-up call and made me realize that our democracy is very fragile. As a student of history and having lived through a changing North Carolina from a segregated one during my childhood to the one that we have today, the January 6th resurrection was shocking to me and disappointing, but I can't say totally unexpected. History has a way of repeating itself, and we can look at our own history as a state and see some possibilities that would have flowed from recognizing what we've done in the past. But I will tell you, our way of life, yours and mine, our way of doing business and having predictability came awfully close to an end on July 6th, or at least being disrupted in major ways. Too many members of Congress basically determined that it was better, as Senator Mitt Romney said, to tell a big lie to the people and not tell them the truth than to live up to what the actuality was. That North Carolina voted more people without fraud or without error than we've ever voted. 82% of the Republicans in the state voted, 75% of the Democrats. No major areas, no mistakes that would have caused any election to be set aside. We ought to be proud of it, not telling the people that bad things happen. And I'll say that this kind of repugnant behavior is a direct threat to the way the Chamber does business and the way that this democracy operates. So I urge you, the leadership of the Chamber, North Carolina Chamber, to do what you can to counteract the big lie and send a message to those who may have supported it in the past that it's not going to be tolerated in the future. I believe fully and firmly in democracy, and I believe that that's the way that we move forward. This is an urgent call to action, and your response to those who willingly disavow their oath to defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic, is a telling statement, and I think it'll speak volumes about all of our beliefs and our values. I want to thank you for the opportunity to talk with you this morning and to share my thoughts with you. And as always, I want you to know that our Senate Democratic Caucus welcomes the opportunity to work with the North Carolina Chamber to make our people stronger and our state more prosperous. I look forward to talking to you further. Thanks for letting me be with you.
Thank you so much, Senator Blue, for joining us today and for your dedication to our state. Thanks for taking us through the last year and for your encouraging outlook on our future. Next, we'll hear from Representative Gail Adcock, the House Deputy Democratic Leader in the North Carolina House of Representatives. Representative Adcock has served in the North Carolina House of Representatives since 2014. She represents District 41, serving constituents in Wake County. During her terms in the North Carolina House, Representative Adcock has worked effectively with members of both parties and has been a primary sponsor of dozens of bipartisan bills that have become law. Her legislative committee assignments include appropriations, health and human services, commerce, regulatory reform, and rules, calendar, and operations of the House. Certainly a slate of committees that keeps you very, very busy. Representative Adcock obtained a nursing diploma from Virginia Baptist Hospital and then worked as a registered nurse to pay for an undergraduate degree in nursing from East Carolina University and a Master of Science in Nursing from University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. She's been a nurse practitioner since 1987 and was Chief Health Officer at SAS Institute for 26 years before retiring in October of last year. Please welcome Representative Adcock to the stage.
Thank you. Thank you, Mark. It feels like old times listening to you talk, and I'm glad to be here with everyone. You know, as a member of the legislature, as well as a nurse, as well as the mother of two, I believe in being real. So I'm sitting here in my kitchen, being real because it's the best place in my house to get an internet connection. It's really a joy for me to be here with all of you today. I don't know how many chamber members know this, but I've attended many of these governmental affairs forums over the years, but I've always sat in the cheap seats. You know, I've never had the chance to be a speaker before. So that's exciting for me. On behalf of the House Democratic Caucus and our leader, Representative Robert Reeves, I'm pleased to be with all of you this morning. And in my allotted 10 minutes, I would like to cover 3 priorities that I believe are shared by House Democrats and the North Carolina Chamber. Our top business priority is workforce development, and I know that you share that goal as well. We know that for current businesses to grow and for businesses outside our state who are scouting for new places to either expand or to move their headquarters, in order for them to choose North Carolina, we must have an abundant, skilled, and educated workforce. The only way to have that kind of 21st century workforce is to invest in every level of education. That means pre-K, K through 12, our community college system, and our colleges and universities, in particular the UNC system. We have a unique opportunity to do this right now with a current budget surplus, additional federal recovery funds, and an economy that is showing signs of a dramatic, if uneven, recovery. There are just 3 points from Governor Cooper's recent budget proposal on needed areas of investment from pre-K to post-high school that I would like to emphasize today. The first is, and I think there was recently a meeting of business leaders who care passionately about education who drove this point home. We need to enroll every single child in a quality pre-K program, and we need to retire the term pre-K waiting list. We know that education is critical before a child ever enters public school. This is clearly, pre-K is clearly one of the most cost-effective uses of taxpayer dollars. It has a huge return on investment. The second point, we cannot continue to struggle to recruit and retain teachers. The governor's budget proposes a 5% raise this year and next year. And then third, when we think about the community college system and the UNC system, the governor's budget certainly does include strong pay raises for faculty and staff, but it also includes unprecedented investment in our university system's capital needs. We just cannot teach and cannot expect these educators to teach the skills needed for today's jobs and tomorrow's jobs, some of which we don't even understand fully yet, in buildings that are crumbling, are unsafe, or do not have the latest technology needed to give them the education that they deserve. Our second shared priority is infrastructure investment. I don't need to tell the business leaders of our state, the ones who are fortunate enough to be participating in this program, and those who cannot be with us today, that we're in an era of historically low interest rates. Of course, this means that North Carolina can borrow money with very low costs. So the governor in his budget has recommended $4.7 billion in a general obligation bond. Of that money, $2.5 billion would go for public education infrastructure needs, which are really desperate in many areas. We have $8 billion in documented infrastructure needs in our 115 school districts. $783 million for the UNC system, $500 million for our community college system, $430 million for health and safety projects, and then another $440 million for cultural and tourism projects, which we know are incredibly important in our state to bring tourists to our state because that has a huge economic impact. The governor's budget also recommends $1.14 billion in cash capital projects using some of our one-time surplus. These, in quote, smaller projects are in state government and the UNC system, and I believe they're anything that's $500 million and less. So we have a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to make a big infrastructure impact and address critical needs that have really been on our books for some time. Obviously, investing in these projects would create many, many jobs, which should interest all of us as we look at lowering our unemployment rate further. And then our third shared priority really is healthcare. I know the affordability of healthcare premiums and the cost and quality of care itself has been on the Chamber's worry list for many years, predating my 6 years in the General Assembly. Prior to coming to the legislature, I talked to Gary Salamito and other chamber members many times about what our business leaders in our state wanted to see in terms of a better healthcare system, not just cost, of course, but quality and access. And I know that you really care about that. As a family nurse practitioner of 34 years, I see this issue both from the human on the ground level, what people need in order to lead productive, healthy lives and to be contributing members of society. But I also see the policy implications and the long-term problems for our state if we do not address this as soon as we can. The argument for Medicaid expansion becomes more compelling each year that we do not do it. As our uninsured numbers grow and as those of us with insurance, most of which is provided by our employers, we carry more and more of the cost shifted finances for the uninsured. I mean, that's one of many reasons that we should expand Medicaid. But right now we're at another unique point in history with the 2-year additional 5% bump in the FMAP, that federal Medicaid assistance percent government pays for its share of Medicaid, now being offered to the 12 states who have not expanded Medicaid yet. We have the opportunity to use that estimated $2 billion to offset the 10% of Medicaid expansion that would normally be paid for by a state. In our state, the state budget would not come out of general grants. But if we take that opportunity now to expand Medicaid and get that FMAP increase and have that $2 billion over 6 years, we can actually fund that 10% for 6 years and give the hospitals and the prepaid health plans sort of a respite from having to cover that 10% for up to 6 years. We can expand Medicaid this year. We can improve the financial viability of our hospitals, many of whom are our biggest employers in the state. We can receive billions of dollars in extra federal funding. We can cover more of our citizens, which now is well over 600,000 people without healthcare insurance. And we can create more healthcare jobs across the state. There's just no other way to look at this than a triple win. Everybody wins in that scenario. So those are the top 3 priorities that I believe the House Democratic Caucus shares with the Chamber. As always, we consider you valued partners. We look forward to working with you, not just on these 3 priorities, but others. Our doors are always open to you. We know that you have the best interests of our state in mind. And I want to thank you for the opportunity to be with you today on behalf of our leader, Robert Reeves. And I will now turn it over to the next speaker.
Representative Babcock, thank you so much for being with us today and for your commitment to North Carolina citizens. You brought up some great points with healthcare and workforce development and infrastructure investment, all issues important to North Carolina's business community. We'll now hear from Senate President Pro Tempore Phil Berger. Senator Berger grew up in Danville, Virginia, in a working class family that taught him the value of hard work. After school, Senator Berger married his high school sweetheart, Pat, and worked in a local factory and then as a produce manager of a grocery store while raising two young kids and attending college. He became the first in his family to graduate from what is now Averett University, and afterwards obtained his law degree from Wake Forest University. Senator Berger was first elected in 2000. He rose to Senate Minority Leader in 2004 and was elected President Pro Tem in January of 2011. He represents the state's 30th senatorial district, which includes Caswell, Rockingham, Stokes, and Surry counties. He currently practices law in Eden, where he resides with his family. Please join me in welcoming Senator Berger to the stage.
Okay. Good morning. Hopefully everybody can hear me. I think I'm unmuted and I think the camera is now working. I want to thank the Chamber for the opportunity to be here today and for all that the Chamber does and will continue to do to make sure that the legislature and the people of North Carolina have an understanding of what is happening, but also an understanding of why the private sector is critically important to the health of the state of North Carolina, and why ultimately the private sector is the engine that actually provides us with ultimately the prosperity and the growth that we see. I want to talk a little bit about the economy, because there is a lot of talk about economic recovery, and I think it's important for us to remember that this economic recovery is actually a recovery from a short-term recession that came about as a result of the COVID situation and the orders that took place for shutting things down. You know, there was an article that I read this morning that reminded me, and I think it's worthwhile for all of us to be reminded that just 13 months ago in March of 2020, the unemployment rate in North Carolina was 3.9%. Now, that unemployment rate was actually the result of a lot of things that had taken place, and the strength of that economy is something that I believe is in large measure helping us at this point. And I believe the unemployment rate in North Carolina now is about 5.2%, which represents almost a threefold drop from where it was at the height of, again, the short-term recession. So I think it's important to remember that. I think the second thing that's important for us to remember is that the additional money that we have, and other speakers have talked about the fund balance that currently exists. I believe at the present time it's well over $4.5 billion in unrestricted cash that the state has. That does not count the federal dollars that are either already here or on the way, which is another approximately $5 billion. But I would sound a word of caution. I think those dollars are both a blessing and a curse. I think they're a blessing because it does, or they do, provide us with the resources to do some things that we've needed to do for a while. We need to remember that those dollars are, for the most part, one-time dollars, meaning that our placing those dollars to work would make more sense, or the most sense, on one-time expenditures, as opposed to beginning new programs that have a recurring price tag. So I believe that that the blessing side is there if we're prudent in how we deploy those dollars. I think those dollars become a curse if what happens is we artificially inflate the recurring spend here in North Carolina on a year-over-year basis, based on the fact that we have those dollars in hand at the present time. I believe that's the same strategy that, unfortunately, the spend now, think about it later, that was in place that led to the recession that took place in 2008, 2009, and we certainly don't want those dollars to lull us into that type of decision making. So I think the strategy that we should employ at the present time in terms of government spending that I believe will be beneficial to the economy is we need to control the year-over-year growth in recurring spending. We need to the extent we have the capacity, reduce the tax burden on the job creators in our economy and on individuals in our economy. We need to be mindful of what happens to those job creators when government takes too large a role in regulating certain activity in the private sector. So I think what you'll see over the upcoming year is Republicans in the Senate being mindful, remembering past, and moving ahead in a prudent fashion. Now, I do think that there are some things that need to be done with those dollars that we have, and some of them are things that are a continuation of what we've been working on and what has been taking place over the past 10 years in the field of education. I believe that we are finally poised to start making some real progress on the issue of third grade reading. We know how important it is that our students have the ability to read at grade level when they leave the third grade. We know that those students who have that skill are more likely to be successful both in their education and ultimately in life, because they will gain the job skills that will be necessary for them to support themselves and their families as they become adults. We also know that those kids that don't have that basic skill at the end of third grade tend to be more likely to drop out of school, to underperform in terms of their potential. And so I believe we are making the prudent or employing the prudent strategies to finally start moving the needle on those third grade reading scores. And I am certainly appreciative of members of both the House and the Senate, Republicans and Democrats, for their support of the Excellent Public Schools Act, and of course, Governor Cooper for his signing of that act. I believe that with the able leadership of Catherine Truitt and members of the State Board of Education, we will see an implementation of that legislation that will provide us with positive results. But there are additional things that we need to do, and additional things we need to continue to do in the field of education. For one, paying our educators. We need to make sure that we continue the progress that's been taking place over the past 8 years or so in terms of improving our overall comparison with other states as far as average teacher pay. We've made tremendous progress there, and I believe we can continue that. We also need to continue the efforts that have taken place to provide parents with more of a say in the education of their children. I think one of the strongest lessons coming out of the past year and the shutdowns and the virtual education is that parents have stepped up in many ways and are prepared to continue to step up in making decisions for their children. That means a continued emphasis on the quality of our traditional public schools, a continued effort to expand the choice options that would be available to parents, including charter schools, and in some instances, for those on the lower end of the income scale, some assistance with private education through an expansion of the Opportunity Scholarship Program. I also think that those parents who decide that they want to homeschool need to be provided with any assistance that they need to the extent that the government is capable of providing that assistance. We need to continue to provide adequate support for our community colleges and our universities. I also believe that the NC Promise program in our university system has proved to be a tremendous success. We need to make sure that we continue to fund that program in ways that continue to strengthen the overall health of Elizabeth City State University, UNC Pembroke, and Western Carolina University, which are our 3 NC Promise campuses. With reference to other things that the infrastructure, the dollars that we currently have can be used for, I believe we should deploy a good bit of that money for infrastructure and repair and renovation, the kinds of one-time expenditures that one-time money is best utilized for. And at this time, I don't believe going out and borrowing money is a prudent thing for us to do. If you in your private life need a new car and you have the resources to pay for that car in cash as opposed to financing it, I believe most people would be prepared to do so. We do have the resources to address much of the infrastructure needs that we have in the state on the basis of pay as you go through the State Capital Infrastructure Fund, which is already set up in connection with our budgeting. I think there are a number of other issues that will pop up as we're moving along. The importance of energy to a strong and vibrant economy is something that cannot be ignored. I'm concerned about some of the things that we've seen in other states, particularly in Texas, where an over-reliance on renewable energy resources and a failure to make sure that the grid situation is in tip-top shape has created some real impediments there, not just for business, but for average individuals. And so we need to be mindful of that and look to the future to make sure that our baseload energy needs are being taken care of by what I believe many people refer to as dispatchable power, and that is power that's available and dispatchable at any time of the day, any time of the night, in any kind of weather. So that's something that we need to keep an eye on as well. Again, there are a lot of other things that will come up, many of which none of us can predict. But again, I appreciate the partnership that exists between the General Assembly and the business community in many respects through the North Carolina Chamber for where we are and for where we're going to go. And I want to thank the Chamber for the opportunity to be here today. Thank you.
Senator Berger, thank you. And we appreciate you joining us today. And thank you for those comments about how there must be a bridge between education and workforce development and how we get there. It's certainly an issue of utmost importance to the business community. Our final speaker for today is Representative Tim Moore, the current Speaker of the North Carolina House. First elected to the General Assembly in 2002, Speaker Tim Moore is currently serving his 4th term as the presiding officer in the North Carolina House of Representatives. He's the longest serving Republican House Speaker in North Carolina history and represents Cleveland County. As a lifelong resident of Kings Mountain, North Carolina, Speaker Moore graduated from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill in 1992 with a BA in political science. He then attended law school at Oklahoma City University School of Law and received his Juris Doctor degree in 1995. After passing the bar exam, Speaker Moore returned to Cleveland County and he currently practices law with his firm, Tim Moore Attorney at Law in Kings Mountain. Please welcome Speaker Tim Moore to the stage.
Well, thank you, Mark. It's good to be with you and appreciate the members of the chamber who are here with us today. You know, when you're the guy that speaks last, there's not a whole lot left to say, but I do have a couple things I'll touch on. And I think that the members who spoke previously certainly gave a great summation of some of the competing points of view, but as well as the shared priorities that we all have across the political spectrum. You know, right now we are in the budget process, an early process where we are negotiating with the Senate to come up with our biennial budget, to look at those needs and to fund items from there. The ARP funds that are here, as well as the CARES Act money, certainly are going to be a great asset that we can use to deal with some of the shortfalls we otherwise have. We also have a very unique opportunity particularly through this newest round of ARP funds, to step in and take care of a lot of the capital needs that have really been where the can's kind of been kicked down the road for years and years. And whether it's transportation, our universities, our community colleges, and education K-12, there's a lot of opportunities here. Of course, there's a lot of funds that are being sent directly to school districts around the state that they'll be able to use. And hopefully they'll use those to address capital and R&R needs, as well as a lot of our towns and counties. So there's a lot of money there. I won't get into some of the longer term systemic concerns that might raise at the federal level with this kind of money coming in from the federal government and what it may do for our debt and our deficit. That's a conversation for a different time and a different venue. But there certainly may be some consequences that we as a state deal with as this economy at some point probably starts correcting itself, due in part to what we're going to start seeing, more than likely some rising interest rates at some point. The good news is that North Carolina is in a very strong position. As Senator Berger mentioned, if you go back to the period just before the COVID-19 and all the related shutdowns, North Carolina had some of the strongest economic indicators it had in decades. Our unemployment was the lowest it had been in a long time. Taxes were, and of course still are, the lowest they've been in decades. And all indications were that the economy here was just on fire and continuing to grow. You know, despite COVID-19, the economy has done very well. As a macro picture has picked up and is turning around. The real estate market still is wrong. There's a lot There's a lot of development, but we also know there are some sectors that have taken significant hits. You can think of the hospitality industry, for example, your restaurants, your lodging, commercial office space, your travel sectors. All of those have taken an impact, not just in our state, but nationally and internationally. And so we know a lot of business owners in this state have really been faced and confronted with very tough choices. I know many of you, more than likely, who are on this call today, have witnessed firsthand and have dealt firsthand with some of the tough issues that have been put on your plate due to COVID-19. One thing I want to do is make sure that folks in our state know that state government is being responsive to that at the legislature, that we are doing all we can to make sure that the policies that we are enacting help and don't hurt, that we are continuing to move for regulatory reform so that we get rid of artificial barriers and cost inhibitors to businesses, that we keep our tax rate low, that we look to see where we can provide tax relief where we can, and that we really adopt policies that keep our fiscal house in order. I do agree that with Senator Berger's comments as well, that we should really look, when it comes to the ARP funds, at trying to fund those one-time needs. Capital, of course, is the top priority. Whether there will be sufficient funds there to do that, or whether we'll need bonding as well, remains to be seen. But like anyone else, I would say if you've got the funds to use them to take care of capital needs and these R&R and a lot of things, you should try to use those funds first. We also know that we need to continue to invest in education. Very proud of the bill that I sponsored that passed unanimously in the House, and I believe passed unanimously in the Senate, which funded a very robust summer school program. We know these children who have been missing class for almost a year of in-classroom time particularly those younger grades, just were falling further and further behind. And we knew we needed to do something. And while there's a number of things that will still need to be done, the summer school program that passed will certainly help. Add to that the Excellence in Education Act, the changes that were passed that actually improve the way that and really focus on the reading comprehension for those younger students. I think we're set up for a good point of seeing us rebound from this as much as we can, as quickly as we can. But we know that more work is going to be needed next year as we go into the next academic year. We're going to continue to support expanding access to those really young students when it comes to pre-K, making sure that every child has that opportunity to grow, whether they're in the traditional public schools, charter schools, or the private schools. So we also need to be flexible and make sure that we allow those opportunities for educational growth that the parents believe is the best for their particular students. As we also move forward, we know that we are faced with a lot of additional expenses because of COVID-19 in our budget. We're assessing those. Fortunately, due to the ARP funds, we believe that we're going to have the funds to, we don't believe, we know we're going to have the funds to cover those. And so we're going to do that. I would expect to see us also to reward our state employees and our public educators for the hard work that they do to make sure that they're properly compensated in this year. We know a lot of folks' jobs have been extremely tough. And so we want to make sure that as we do our budget that we recognize that too. You know, we're really lucky to live in North Carolina. It is, in my opinion, the best state in the nation. It's the best state to live, to raise a family, to start a business, to expand a business, and I would say to retire. We really have it covered from the mountains to the sea. But, you know, as great as our state is, we as policymakers have to make sure we're making the right decisions and we're putting the right priorities first. You know, it's great to be able to get from the mountains to the seas, but guess what? You need good roads to do so. You need to make sure that we have a great state that folks want to live in, but we have to protect our environment and our natural resources to make sure we do that too. We need to make sure we do all we can to make sure North Carolina is competitive, to continue to attract residents to the state, to retain business here, and to make it a great place that everyone's going to want to live. I really appreciate what you all have done at the state chamber by being a collective voice for businesses around the state and really giving that opportunity for the business community to come in and express those views. I can tell you that when I talk to anyone from the chamber, whether it was Gary, Mark, you name it, Jason, anybody, Chris, I mean anybody who we talk to, the chamber has a great deal of respect on both sides of the aisle and really does a great job speaking for its members, because we know that the state chamber is it's the one single source that takes all of those diverse business groups and brings everyone together to really fight for a unified voice when it comes to public policy. What I can tell you as we work through this year and through these challenges, that I expect to see even more continued great public policy, more growth in our state. And I can tell you that the input from you individually, as well as the chamber, is going to be of immense value. It's going to be taken into account. And I suspect, like in years past, you'll probably be very pleased with the product that we come through with when it comes to our legislation. With that may be one of the shortest presentations that I've done, but want to thank you for the opportunity to be with you today. And again, thank you for all your work and your hard efforts.
Thank you, Speaker Moore. We appreciate that. Our group discussions are up next, and we appreciate your flexibility with us today. Those will begin at noon on Zoom. And you should have an invitation email with links to each of those in your email. So go ahead and check out for those. But before we do break into those group discussions, I just want to conclude our time together with a few closing remarks. On behalf of the NC Chamber team, I want to extend our gratitude to today's sponsors, legislators, policymakers, economic experts, and all of you in attendance for engaging with us and actively participating in today's Government Affairs Summit. For your dedication to North Carolina, as well as your patience as we continue navigating how to best work in a virtual environment. As full as this gathering has been, there is one notable absence today. Gary Salamito, President and CEO of the NC Chamber, is where he needs to be today, and that's with his family. Over the course of the last month, Gary has lost both of his parents, most recently his father on Saturday. We will keep him in our thoughts, and we knew you would like the opportunity to do the same. Gary does want you to know he appreciates the relationship that he has with each of you and the relationship the NC Chamber has with our friends in the public and private sectors. North Carolina's success and prosperity depend on our business community and elected officials working together to secure a thriving future for our state and all citizens. And the NC Chamber looks forward to collaborating with you and advocating on your behalf in 2021 and beyond to achieve that. We rely on your feedback as we improve our programming and ask that you please complete a handful of survey questions. To make it simple, there's a link in the chat to do that. And that will also be a link that you'll see in the recap email that you'll receive in the next day or so. As a reminder, the NC Chamber is holding our Energy Summit virtually on May 11th. You can visit ncchamber.com for more details about that summit and our other upcoming events. Thank you. Again, thank you for being with us. And most importantly, be well and be safe. We have a short video for you, and we want to thank Governor Cooper and our legislative leaders for uniting in this vital message to North Carolinians. This is our best shot to save lives and livelihoods. And the link to watch that is in your chat. So please feel free to share it. I look forward to seeing you in one of the group discussions at noon. Check your email for those updated links. Thank you.
Okay, well, it is 12:04, and we want to thank you all for your patience and your understanding given the technical difficulties. But I can tell you every time we have something like this, our events team is so agile and they're so nimble that they've been able to really turn things around. And we're so grateful that you decided to stay with us this afternoon, because you're going to hear from two people who can pretty much talk to you about the economy, the budget. And so what we're going to do today is talk about North Carolina's economy, budget, and projections. And we have the two people for you in North Carolina who can help you think it through and get more information about what's happening. And they are Charlie Perouse. Many of you are familiar with Charlie. He's the State Budget Director at the Office of State Budget and Management. And Dan Gerlach, who is no stranger to what's going on in the world of politics. He is the owner of Dan Gerlach LLC. It's so great to have you both with us. I'm going on mute so these guys can take it away.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Deborah, and thank you to the North Carolina and the sponsors of this great event, this Government Affairs Conference, for hosting us today. I know Sean Harding here is from the North Carolina Farm Bureau. He was recognized earlier, but I worked in rural North Carolina too long not to say hello to Sean and to thank the Farm Bureau and all the other sponsors who have put this on. We're joined today by Charlie Perouse. Charlie is a graduate of Havelock High School, North Carolina State University, University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, and worked for both the legislative branch of government and the Fiscal Research Division and the governor's office, working as the state budget officer and deputy state budget officer for several governors, quite frankly. In between all that, he went over to the University of North Carolina system and was the chief operating officer and a senior vice president over there. Charlie's had a long and storied career of public service and leadership to our state. We're glad to be with you. So now it's my turn. I get to pick on him. Now, we usually used to do this when we served together behind closed doors. So you're going to look at this. And Charlie, I think we've heard from some earlier speakers talk about how if it was just 12 months ago, it was April 2020, and we're wondering how the North Carolina economy is going to look. It's quite a bit different today than one, it was in April 2020, or two, that we thought was going to be just 12 months later. Give us your insight as you've taken a hard look at this about what's going on with the North Carolina economy and any kind of differences you might see sectorally or establishments of a certain size or geographically.
Sure. Thank you, Dan, and Chamber. Thanks for having me today and for that warm welcome. Yeah, I mean, what a difference 12 months makes. At this time last year, our unemployment rate in May of 2020 at its peak was 13.5%. It's now down to 5.2% in March 2020. none of us had been through this before. We had never gone into sort of an economic shutdown, if you will, and shuttering of large parts of our economy. So we had never modeled it or really understood it. And so, when we did our consensus revenue forecast back in May of last year, we anticipated that revenue declines in the state level might be in the 10 to 25% range, and assumed that it was probably going to be about 15%. So on a $25 billion budget, we thought we, might be down $3.5 to $4 billion both last fiscal year and in the current fiscal year, and not knowing when it would start to rebound. Obviously, I've been around for a while, as Dan mentioned. I started noticing in July and August that we started to stabilize and started to get back to sort of, I don't want to say normal because nothing about this is normal, but at the aggregate level, things started to improve and there started to be a little bit more confidence in the economy. The strength in the financial and housing sector, was very helpful to higher income households. Consumer spending really started to pick up last summer, as the slowdown and shuttering in the service economy impacted, that area greatly and continues to do so sort of in the hospitality and leisure. A lot of people started putting that money into the large durable goods area. And so our sales tax collections, started to grow in double digits as we got into summer and fall of last year. And then obviously at the end of last year, we had to run up in the stock market, which gave people confidence that moving forward, we were in a better place. And as we started talking about vaccines and getting shots in arms, as the federal government provided unprecedented stimulus and assistance, unlike anything we'd ever seen, there's just more confidence in the economy. The weaknesses continue to be sort of the impact in the lower wage areas. Leisure and hospitality, we're still down about 20% in jobs. They tend to impact lower income folks who have been extra hard hit during this pandemic, as well as minorities and women. So those are some areas where we've got some shoring up to do.
Right. So Charlie, thanks a lot for that. And I think you've anticipated my next question, which is the effect on the economy overall with the state budget picture. But you're a member of the state budget officers, the NASBO, the National Association of State Budget Officers. Are everybody feeling this kind of relief from where we are, or is North Carolina, as we claim and we love to be, doing better than other states? What's your sense of that?
Yeah, and to put this in numbers and sort of talk about where we are compared to everybody else is, we in the current fiscal year, based on the revised forecast to where we were, we anticipate being $4 billion better than where we anticipated we would be a year ago. So when you hear in the state budget that there's about $5 billion of one-time money on the bottom line, it has everything to do with the updated revenue forecast. And sort of going forward, our recurring revenues for the next 2 fiscal years are expected to grow in the 3.5% to 4.5% range and are actually higher than the pre-pandemic estimates. So we have rebounded structurally a lot quicker than we thought too. Dan, I would say we're on the leading edge of states. When you look at sort of the leading indicators of economic growth, sort of stability, population growth, and in business investment, we're definitely in the top 5 to top 10 in those main indicators on momentum as you compare to other states. And so we're real proud of that. A lot of it has to do with the people on this call who are investing and have confidence and want to be here in North Carolina, but we're definitely on the leading edge. And I would say when you sort of, and I don't want to pick on the small states, but sometimes the percentage increases of the smaller states are higher than us. But when you look at the top 10 to 15 large states, North Carolina has as much momentum as any of them do right now.
Well, that's great to hear you affirm that. And we're not wishing ill on other states. Well, maybe a couple of them we don't like, but certainly that's not what we're hoping for. But maybe you could say, okay, now that you've got this and you see us growing at 3.5% to 4%, let me just push on that a little bit, because one of the things I saw and I talk with my clients is one of the reasons for this kind of health of the sales tax base was the tremendous growth in online collections from online sales merchants. And some of that seemed to be just stuff that we hadn't taxed before. but was kind of going along. And some of it was, you talked about the good news is that people spending money, they spend money on stuff subject to the sales tax, but there's only so many dishwashers and, new refrigerators and roofs we can buy. So do you worry a little bit, Charlie, about as that ebbs, if people can only buy so much stuff, although I don't want to make it a challenge to Americans because apparently we can, that, unless the service sector, the stuff where we're going out to eat or something like that comes back, then it may throw those statistics off. How confident are you in the revenue forecast? From a 1 to 10, 1 being like, I have no earthly idea, hell, it's a crapshoot, versus 10 being, I have metaphysical certainty, I will bet the house, the ranch, and the dog on it.
Right. You're exactly right, Dan. And honestly, I was probably a 7 to 8, even more confident than one would normally be in my position, because we tend to be conservative and sort of, but I think there's just so many things that are positive right now. And you bring up some supply chain and access to equipment and to labor that are challenges, but structurally, the amount of money that's been put in the economy by the federal government and federal stimulus has sort of stabilized things, both for individuals and for businesses, as well as just the continued stability in the stock market has been strong. And when you look at job growth across the way, Dan, you and I have been around a long time. Each economic downturn has its own personality.
Right.
And when you looked at sort of the last 3 traditional recessions following Persian Gulf, .com, and then the Great Recession, you saw job losses across the board in all sectors, in professional business services, legal, financial, IT, government, et cetera. We just haven't seen that in the pandemic. The job loss has been concerted in the service sector, the leisure and hospitality, and to a lesser extent, government, but not across the board.
Okay, so let's pivot on that some, right? And just for everybody here, if you're trying to get a word in, I mean, we'll talk all day, but if you could post your questions in the chat, that'd be great. Charlie, so talk a little bit. Here you have an audience of the job creators of the state, the members of the chamber, and those who promote kind of a good, reliable business climate. Talk a little bit. I want to give you a chance to make your commercial here for the governor's budget. How does it positively affect and foster this kind of leading business climate and take advantage of our leadership position that you argue that we have?
Absolutely. And I would say, Dan, as we think about budget development, you saw that the governor presented his 2-year general fund budget a few weeks ago, but he's also going to be presenting the American Rescue Plan budget to the legislature in the next few weeks, which, recommends spending for our $8+ billion portion of state and local government money that we can spend over the next 3 years. And they almost work in tandem. In the governor's budget from a few weeks back on the general fund side, obviously there's, the traditional investments. We have a lot of cash on the bottom line. And so there's recommendations for infrastructure investments, through in the capital and rehab area for state and university buildings statewide. There's large investments in the environment and clean energy space. This is, building parks and rec and other sort of type facilities, as well as sort of bringing clean energy jobs in. On the workforce development, the governor's doubling down in the community college area in the high demand fields. We hear from a lot of you that there's a lot of areas where we don't produce enough graduates in the STEM and health and other certificate programs in the community colleges. And so he recommends money there to graduate more people in the high demand fields. He included some additional money in some traditional commerce programs, small business innovation, and minority business development investments. And then there's sort of on the tax side, the revenue side, there's no new taxes or fees that's included in the governor's budget as well. And so it's a pretty consistent budget, something that builds off our positives and sort of looks forward to the needs of the future.
Well, let me push on that some. So you talked about, you hinted, and here the life of the budget, I know how it is. You get the governor's budget out, you feel like you could take a breath, but right now you're going to have to propose the use of the state money, I guess, and perhaps more than that, than the $5.2 billion. That's kind of the general state aid. that other speakers have talked about. When is that going to come? And can you give us any, if you just want to tell us what's in it, that'd be fine. We wouldn't tell anybody honest.
Right.
But if you just want to tell us, it'd be fine. Just a couple hundred people on the call, just curious. Go ahead, brother.
You got it. You know, the governor has tasked me with working with local government and other leaders to really think how we can make transformational change for North Carolina. This $5+ billion of state money and $3+ billion going to the counties and municipalities that can be expended over the next 3.5 years gives us a transformational opportunity to make generational change if we work together. And so I've been meeting with the county commissioners and the League of Municipalities to figure out how the state can make some investments. We're working with locals, we can make this transformational change. And so, you know, the governor's looking at large investments in infrastructure with local governments around water, sewer, housing, transportation, are areas that we're looking at. We're also looking at transformational recommendations in the workforce development area, you know, looking at, you know, we're aiming to have 2 million more people with 4 and 2-year degrees and certificates over the next 10 years. And so how do we increase that pipeline to meet the job, the working job demands that you need? We're also understanding that there's still some donut holes and that there's people and businesses hurting out there. And so I think there's a recognition on top of what the federal government did in the ARP that the state may need to use some additional monies through the ARP for business development and innovation. Are there some areas that are still extra hard hit and that are going to need some help, leisure, hospitality, and others, to sort of buffer them for the next 2 to 3 years? I think there's a recognition that the short answer is yes. And then I think, you know, I would also anticipate that there will be an extra emphasis on sort of rural and small town economic development too, that the large municipal areas and are doing well, but are there transformational and sort of innovative things that we can take out to rural parts of North Carolina to help them get their Main Street, you know, back on their feet? Are there, you know, I didn't even mention broadband. Oh my gosh, on the infrastructure investments, that should have been number one. Are there ways that we can work with local government, especially in our rural areas, to make them more viable in an area where young people are going to want to stay and people are going to want to grow their business? And so we're really excited about the opportunities that are out there.
All right, so you saw transportation. I was on that like a duck on a June bug because Ray Starling was talking about Destination 2030. We see transportation. Do you mean things like highways and roads kind of make up for the deficit and those things? Just we got some.
Absolutely, that would be a big part of it, Dan, is right. Sort of shovel ready highway infrastructure projects, roads, bridges, those kind of things that are ready to go, to help backfill some of the lost revenue, as you said, sure. But also for some of the larger, you know, transportation projects that we have in the queue.
All right. So we got a couple questions in the chat, and let me wrap a few of them together. Some of them privately to me, and some of them to in general. Is one, and we've had earlier speakers talk about being cautious about all this federal money flying in, and some questions in the chat about how do we make sure it gets leveraged appropriately, and the same time that we don't create ourselves that we get so reliant on it that all of a sudden when it runs out we're in a tough situation like that. And also some greater concern is this: a couple speakers and some of the business leaders have concern about the just sheer amount of money the federal government is spending,
right? And
they're borrowing to do that. And are you concerned at all? So there's two different questions. One, how do we leverage and use that federal money and not be foolish about it? I was going to say another word, but not be foolish about it for the long term. And two is about, do we have a concern about the greater macroeconomic effect of just spending like crazy from the federal level and its any kind of effect on the state budget in the long term?
Sure. I think the first question I'll take, you know, obviously we're considering, you know, at least from the governor's side, that most of the ARP spending, which we now have at least through December 31st, 2024 to spend, we're generally thinking about that as non-recurring, that That's why infrastructure investments and some of these targeted investments are good things to do, because it doesn't, create a state burden down the line. We're cognizant of this much money and having to spend it this, even over 3.5 years. And so pipeline development and making sure that we have proper capacity in state and local governments, but also in the private sector to spend this money wisely is going to be part of the ARP investment. And it was part of the governor's 2-year budget too. I could see this coming down the road. So I've been thinking about the capacity issue really over the last year or so. And I think finally on that is, I think folks realize that our deadline to spend this money right now is 3.5 years from now. But I think this administration and hopefully future administrations will give us a little bit more time, because you want to do the most good, but do it smartly. And sometimes doing it too fast isn't the right way. We want to be methodical and thoughtful on how we do it. On the macroeconomic side, obviously we have a balanced budget that we have to live within, right? And so from a state perspective, we're in good economic shape. In the governor's budget, we recommended doubling the amount in the rainy day fund to $2.2 billion. We continue to be conservative in our projections and have structural soundness. So from our standpoint, we feel good about where we are, and we're going to weave this federal ARP money in properly. What the feds do on the borrowing and how that all works, that's not my expertise area. I know that we have been running deficits for many years, in the past, and the federal government works through that in their way. I think for all of us, Dan, and this is a long way away of saying, we just crave stability from the federal government. Yeah. And so the recurring money we get from the feds, we want that to be consistent. And obviously this ARP, we're thinking about one-time transformational opportunity.
Right. Okay. A couple more questions, Charlie. Let me just hit you with this. One is, there's a concern. Obviously, as you say, this recession is a flavor of its own. Sectors are affected disproportionately, but also women. You talked about low-income people, but also I think women disproportionately hit by this. We have a question in the chat on that. And what's kind of the thought? How does the governor's budget support? What's the thought process about how to get women engaged back in the workforce, support them? Are you going to need to retrain them because the jobs they previously held won't be there? Or, we get enough childcare in there to make sure and getting schools open to help them with that? And there's a big New York Times, there's a New York Times, The Daily has a radio show, and I advise the mothers on this call to listen to it because you may see yourself in it. Mm-hmm. Go ahead.
Now, you mentioned it, Dan. I mean, it's almost a three-pronged approach. Obviously, number one, we got to get vaccines in arms so people feel comfortable going back to work and sending their young people to school, number one. Number two, revamping sort of childcare services through childcare subsidies and having, childcare centers open and financially viable is really important too. And it's something that the federal government is helping us a lot on, is childcare subsidies, but ensuring that those businesses are viable so men and women or parents can have a place to bring their kids back. And then I think sort of long term, we have to think innovatively on what kind of environment do we need to have for female and minority business owners and all business owners to make them be willing to open a business, and what kind of capacity and support do we need to provide them to feel confident to get back in the workforce or to start their own business. And so that's sort of the three-pronged approach that we're looking at.
Right. We have a question on broadband. We have some great broadband providers on the call, just to tell you that, and some advocates for it. I mean, I think there are three issues around broadband. One is its physical availability. Two is about whether or not people can afford it. And three is about whether or not people decide to take advantage of it if they're offered it and it's affordable to them. So right. What the governor's thinking at address those? Are you working collaboratively with the providers and other interested parties? Tell us about that.
Yes, and what governor's contemplating on broadband is awesome, and working together with the legislature on it. And I think it's an area of bipartisan support. He's going to set a pretty aggressive goal that that the entire state be connected with a certain level of speed by X date. And it's a double AAE, you mentioned it, Dan, of access through fiber, fixed wireless, or satellite. The second A is affordability, is we've got to work with the providers to have an affordable plan, and with state or federal subsidy, along with families contributing, can they afford access? And then the E is the enablement, is we have a lot of people that might have access and they might be able to afford it, but they may not have a device that they have, or they may not understand how to use it. And I can tell you that my 75-year-old mom has her little jitterbug phone and she thinks that that's a computer and all that stuff. I'm like, Mom, no, it's just a phone that you can take pictures on. It's not a computer. And so there's a lot of people out there that will need some access to some computer or a tablet, as well as some training in order to utilize it as well. And so it is all three: access, affordability, and enablement.
Enablement? Is that
Yes.
a word? I mean,
Yeah, I'm
use
sorry. We
impact
got
as
to
a
do
verb.
better.
It's killing me.
Yeah, we got to do better
Enablement.
on the verbiage there, Dan.
Enablement. Well, that gives our business community something to do. I mean, if you have a better word from a man than that before the governor's. Charlie, I think you avoided my question. I'm going to hit you on it. When do you think we might see these recommendations from the governor on the American Rescue Plan?
I would anticipate early to mid-May.
Okay.
Because we're still waiting on federal guidance. So we want to make sure what we bring forward are allowable expenditures. We think most of what we have are, but we want to make sure. And so we anticipate federal guidance in early May, and then the governor's plan would be a week or two after that.
Yes, indeed. I am, as a commercial for the Institute for Emerging Issues, Sarah Langer Hall's here, and she talked about these kind of digital inclusion grants that are available. So I pitch that to you. We're about, Deborah, are we about out of time? I mean, how are we doing on this?
Dan, you're doing very well on time, and we do have the capacity to go over the 12:30 time if your colleagues would like to do so.
Right. Okay. So Ray Starling has written an epistle here. I mean, I have to kind of scroll through his whole question, but I think Ray's interested. I think his ears perked up about the good son of Sampson County there, and interested in do we have the gumption, to use his daddy's word, about how to elaborate a little bit how you're working together with counties and cities to help leverage money and have everybody rolling on the same oar. Are there some ideas of leverage there? Would you do some matching grant programs, or would you do some regional programs, or all the above? Talk to us a little bit, give us a little more flavor for that.
Sure. Ray, North Carolina treasurer, great question. And you bring up one that's delicate, right? You got to find the right way to do it is collaboratively. We've had the county commissioners, the League of Municipalities, and the local government commission, Ray, I forgot to mention them, working together on a plan that sort of would be a tier matching structure that for distressed counties and cities, or distressed water sewer systems where we want to try to get them up to snuff, or there's potential regionalization or some things we might look at. There would be a base state and local match for some projects, but for those that are distressed, or there's poorer counties and municipalities and they work together, you might get a super match. So let's say a traditional match is 50-50 state and local. A super match might be 75-25 or 80-20 state to local, to encourage the locals to do this project. And so we're looking at sort of that for both water and sewer, as well as housing, and potentially some other areas too, although we don't want to make it too complicated, because if it's too complicated, the legislature won't want to take it up, right? And we also don't want to pit groups against one another. And so that's in the local government commission. Ray has been a big help in the treasurer's office to help us work through some of the details on this.
That's great, Charlie. Now, one thing is you talked about kind of how this physical infrastructure partnership would work. Right. I think some of us, I know some of my clients and some people in this call interested in, is there thought to doing that with the workforce and with the other things that are concerned to our job creators here?
I think there will be, and that's an area we're still working through. We're on the workforce side. trying to make access to higher education more predictable and more affordable, both in the 2-year, 4-year on the certificate side. So we're still thinking through how sort of revamping of that could be helpful. And that is a huge, big idea. It's also very complicated, Dan, as you know. And so, but that's the transformational change we're trying to make. You know, one of my former bosses is a governor that you and I both know said, you don't waste a crisis. You know, we've had a difficult time the last year. We have a large amount of money at our disposal. Let's really think big here and thoughtfully, and don't waste this moment.
Well, just to confess, I mean, in all the crises I had, we never had several $1 billion from the federal government to help us fix it. So
That's true.
Forgive me if I'm not as, see the parallel so much, but all right, brother. So I've peppered you. We've got, if there's any other questions on this, you let me know. I didn't see any more in the chat. That doesn't mean that y'all don't have any. You can ask now or hold your peace. He's only the state budget officer, has the ear of the governor, and governor's, the best time to get the governor's right before he's about a couple weeks before he tries to get a proposal out. So Lisa said, we can use video or audio if you want. She is free or shackles. By the way, another Sampson County leader right there, Charlie.
Good.
All right. Healthcare expansion as cost. So, Charlie, you can talk about that. I mean, one of the things that the chamber talked about before you got here, I think, was about value. I think about value in healthcare, right? The idea of affordability. We're trying to get some certainty around association health plans or some other kind of structures like that of interest to businesses. But tell us about healthcare expansion and what the governor is thinking on that.
Sure. And this is an issue that has been, a big discussion point for the last few years. I think, Medicaid expansion has been a 4-letter word the last few years, but I think closing the healthcare gap and sort of the incentives that the federal government has dangled in front of us at this point, which basically is a super match on FMAP expenditures that would bring in about $1.6 billion to the state of North Carolina over the next 2 years if we expanded Medicaid or closed the healthcare gap. That $1.6 billion of additional federal money could basically pay for the non-federal share of expanding Medicaid for the next 4 or 5 years. I think on top of the fact that we're transitioning to Medicaid managed care on July 1 gives the Republican leadership more confidence that we're going to have more consistent Medicaid costs. And so sort of the devil is in the detail, but I think some sort of closing the healthcare gap legislation has a real opportunity this year. We're nearing the end of, or the worst part of the pandemic. We have stability with moving to managed care, and we have the additional federal subsidy to help us on the financial side. I think the stars are aligning to tackle this. I don't want to. Who knows where this would go, but I think the stars are aligned here, and obviously it's a large economic boost. Across the state, brings in several $1 billion of federal money. It gives some continuity to rural hospitals as well. It's obviously provides capacity across many provider sectors when you give them 600,000 more people that might have healthcare coverage. And so the benefits are large. The process is complicated, but Dan, I think we have a chance to really get there this year.
Right. You talked a little bit about the cost, and I gather you'd have a plan for sustaining after this $1.6 billion runs out. Is that right?
Absolutely.
Okay. All right, we got just a couple minutes left. So one of the things I'm curious about, now some people on here, unlike you and I, Charlie, work for the governor, and we take a little offense when a lot of legislative people hanging around the building, as we say, oh, there's the governor's budget. We're going to use it for a doorstop. Nobody pays any attention to that and all that. And I'm tired of hearing that myself. But what's the reaction been? Give us a sense of, is there any hope here? Tell us what you got.
There absolutely is. And, the news and the newspapers tend to be negative because that's just the way it goes. And our track record over the last couple of years of getting a comprehensive budget deal hasn't been very good. I see a different tone this year. I'm in constant contact with legislative leadership and their staff about working together. I know the governor has really spent a lot of time working with Senator Berger and the speaker and the Democratic leaders on building trust and momentum around getting a comprehensive budget deal. I think the school reopening bill of a couple weeks ago gives everybody, made people feel really good that we can work together, that we can accomplish more when we work together. And so, it's going to be tough. Even in good times, it's tough. There's going to be a lot of machinations over the next few months, but I really anticipate as we get into June and July, there will be a comprehensive budget deal where everybody wins. And when we work together, the business community and the 10.6 million people who count on us, government works for them. And that's my expectation this year.
So one more question, Charlie. So one of the things is we have a leadership position here is in North Carolina on the economy. Are there plans for the governor to kind of engage and think down the road of what's going to happen with different private segments of the private sector economy to help us as we try to reshore or protect our supply chain or to build our supply chain, anything like that? Because I know the chamber would be eating that with a big spoon. Love to be part of that if we can help.
Absolutely. And we're still working through that, but I would anticipate there would be some parts of that, what you just said in our American Rescue Plan recommendation is, let's shore up businesses that might have been left behind or been extraordinarily hit during the pandemic. So there's that piece of it.
All right, Charlie, I'm sorry, I'm cutting you off as I've done before. Charlie Peruce, State Budget Officer, we're grateful to have you. Chamber leadership, we're grateful to have you. All y'all have participated in and asked some good questions. Hope we've benefited from this. So it's a Zoom meeting. We're going to run out of time, so we may cut off. Y'all have a great day. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody.